Our next keynote speaker, and it is my particular honor and pleasure to invite Dr. Nivedita Haran, Secretary of the Home Department of the Government of Kerala in India, and she will talk about disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation strategies, going from policies to practice. So she will focus then on the practical implementation. Dr. Haran holds a post-graduation economics and a doctorate in philosophy. She has worked through the ranks of Indian civil service, leading revenue, land management, energy, and institutional capacity building activities in the state. Dr. Haran was actively involved in the rescue and recovery operations after the Indian Ocean tsunami. She was also part of the institutionalization of disaster management in Kerala, being involved in establishment of the Kerala Land and Disaster Management Institute, as well as the State Disaster Management Authority. Dr. Haran, we are extremely pleased to have you with us, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you and namaste. Let me begin by thanking Dr. Walter Amann for honoring me with this invitation to deliver the keynote address at the IDRC 2014. Earlier, when I accepted the invitation from UNEP to come to Davos to chair a session here, my objective was to meet some very interesting people and to enjoy the picturesque surroundings of Davos. But Walter made sure that I earned my visit. Alas, there are no free lunches in this world. Well, jokes apart, I'm truly very delighted to talk to you about my views on translating the concepts of climate change, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction from policy to practice. As a career civil servant with the Government of India, working my way up from the bottom of the ladder, I have had the opportunity to be both at the front end of disasters as well as at the policy formulation level. As a young civil servant 34 years ago, it was my duty to deal with disasters, reach relief to affected families, both natural and man-made, coordinating the rescue after major road or water transport accidents, and arranging relief after floods, landslide, or even coastal erosion. These were all part of my duties as a sub-collector. But 25 years later, I had the honor and the privilege of setting up the State Disaster Management Authority and being one of the founding members. Let me give you a quick comparative picture of the status of disaster management structure in a developed country and a developing. Any disaster has as its operational components preparedness, prevention, protection and relief, and saving, rehabilitation, and mitigation. The preparedness part, transportation safety. In a developed country, it's normally ensured, whereas it is not always a priority in a developing country. Biomedical waste management, epidemic control, urban waste, natural hazard risk reduction, these are all major issues that face us when we are confronting a disaster. Awareness, so important, capacity building, reaching the knowledge up to the grassroots level. We find in our cities, even in our cities, For instance, in slums, the awareness is lacking. Proper reaction, it's very trained in a developed country, whereas in a developing country, it is still untrained. Availability of equipment, one of the biggest problems we face. The equipments, there is no proper system of maintaining the equipments. Life is highly valued, but in a developing country, poverty is an issue. Electric connections, social discipline, food and clothing, land management, very modernized land record maintenance in a developed country, whereas in a developing country, we still are struggling. Law and order, well maintained, but needs improvement. Rehabilitation. There is need to have proper setup where persons affected by disasters can be temporarily located. That often is not there. Of course, we are trying to do that. Mitigation, funding, often not a priority. I will come to that later. So this is how I look at it. Now, the point I want to discuss here today is that if you go by theory alone, investing on climate change and disaster risk reduction should be a given. The Stern report on the economic impact of climate change has clearly demonstrated that the cost of inaction to deal with climate change is much more expensive than the cost of action. It has been quantified, and it's shown that for every dollar spent on prevention of disasters, it is worth $7 in value of averted disasters. So rich or poor, any country, should they not be investing on climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction? That's what logic would say. However, that's only in a perfect world. In theory, there should be no difference between spending on disasters. There should be no alternative. But unfortunately, that's not how it is. A little background on India. India's hazard profile shows that 57% of our land is vulnerable to earthquakes. Of this, 12% is vulnerable to severe earthquakes. Where I come from, it's a vulnerable area, which is in the southwestern coast. 68% of the land is vulnerable to drought, 12% to floods, 8% to cyclones. And apart from natural disasters, some cities in India are also vulnerable to chemical and industrial disasters and other man-made disasters. This being so, what is the situation in India and in Kerala? The good news is that DRR is working. I can say this confidently based on my experience in India. Compared to 20 years back, when disaster management was all about arranging for response to disasters and providing relief to victims, there is a lot more emphasis on disaster prevention and preparedness now. In India, in 2006, we enacted the Disaster Management Act, which established the National Disaster Management Authority. We have the NIDM, the National Institute for Disaster Management, whose job is to build capacity in the government and in the non-government sector also. There are well-equipped control rooms functioning in every district 24/7, with reasonable good coordination between the different arms of the government. There is the National Disaster Response Force, which is a group of trained professionals provided with modern and specialized equipment for disaster response, pre-positioned across the country in 8 strategic locations, with their own arrangement for mobility. All these structures are duplicated at the level of every province or state, as we call it. For instance, last Saturday, I came here on Sunday. Last Saturday, we had very heavy rains in the southern part of Kerala, where I come from, 550 millimeters within 40 hours. And anticipating mudslips, we in the SDMA took an immediate decision to restrict movement on the hill roads and also called the rescue team from the nearest National Disaster Response Force. It took us barely 10 minutes of talking to decide that we took this decision, and within 6 hours, the NDRF team was in town before I left. So these are some of the positives. Some more positives are, we have the Hazard, Vulnerability and Risk Assessment Cell set up. Some of their major activities are the vulnerability map of Kerala, which has been prepared for 5 disasters, which includes earthquakes, landslides, coastal erosions, and floods, and droughts. Riverbank mapping has been started. It's going on. 6 rivers are completed using GIS-based software. The cell is also mapping the legacy data of the last 10 years, which is something very important, and we often tend to ignore it. There is action also being taken to assess disaster damages more accurately, because after a disaster happens, it becomes almost a political issue as to how much loss has happened. And whereas it is much better to go by facts, and in that we take the help of remote sensing data. So our capacity for understanding disasters and communicating early warning is on the increase. The performance of the states during a recent mock drill exercise conducted by INCOIS that monitors the tsunami in the Indian Ocean area was not so bad. As many of you know, when the cyclone Phylin hit our eastern coast earlier this year, less than 20 lives were lost. I say 20 lives, even though lives were lost, with pride, because a similar cyclone 15 years ago had taken more than 10,000 lives. So yes, disaster risk reduction is working. It's working in India, and I'm talking of 1.2 billion Indians, 1/5 of humanity. But could we have done better? And more? Definitely yes. For just as we have the shining example of the cyclone in Orissa, we have the very tragic example of the loss of a large number of human lives that took place in the Himalayan state of Uttarakhand, again last year. So just as we have the very good example of the tsunami rehabilitation program in Kerala, which we implemented, which I was leading, as Walter mentioned, where we, as one of the shining examples, we relocated 11,000 families living in vulnerable areas to areas which are safer, acquiring land and building new safe houses for them. There are cases where, due to simple floods, people lose their lives, and that is unacceptable. As an administrator, I dislike failures even more, as each failure regresses us by many years. In DRR, we do not have the luxury of time to do that. Yet this is not the story of India alone. An article in the Huffington Post last week makes the same point. In countries from United States to Australia to China to India, new institutions are being put in place to promote disaster risk reduction, and there is already evidence of success. The article gives a lot of credit to the Hyogo Framework for Action and calls for a worthy successor to it when it expires in 2015. I echo those sentiments. Now, I'm not saying that India or the world has fully translated the required policies in DRR into practice. Far from it. The situation is even less rosy when it comes to climate change adaptation. Unlike DRR, where there is an agreed global framework on which member states can base their actions, negotiations on global treaties or framework following the Kyoto Protocol are deadlocked. Yet, the climate clock is ticking, and we need action on the ground with or without global agreements. This is probably a good point for me to depart and explain why is it that sufficient changes are not happening in countries around the world in the speed that we want it to happen to combat climate change and DRR. As is normal in such situations, there is no single overriding cause. There are a number of them, and I wish to flag some of these. The first issue is about capacity. While the theoretical issues on hazard mapping and climate change predictions may be well understood at the global and national levels, there is still not enough understanding on the topic at the local level. Local communities that have lived with droughts for hundreds of years still do not have any tools to anticipate droughts, let alone to know how it will be aggravated by changing climate and to be convinced about it. In many parts of the world, there is still no fully developed set of building codes or mechanisms to enforce those building codes. Where there is a foolproof techno-legal framework, there is political and bureaucratic lethargy or even more serious, vested interests to scuttle their enforcement. So even when there is sufficient understanding of the science of earthquake at the global level and good engineering practices to build earthquake-proof structures, one should not assume that such knowledge is universal. Just because something is on the web, it does not make it understandable to all or reachable to all, especially for those who have to translate these into policies and practices at the cutting-edge level. The world needs to spend a lot more effort on capacity building at the lowest and the operational level for both CCA and for DRR. In the same way, the existing wide chasms between policymakers and practitioners, between scientists and administrators, between the state and non-state actors seem to be so frustrating and annoying to me sometimes. Aren't we all working towards a common goal? Sometimes it appears that some of us are busier blaming somebody else rather than performing our own assigned goals and roles. The third issue is the fundamental economic dilemma of limited resources and unlimited wants. 2 years back, during the last Global Forum conference, when I was in Davos, I had the opportunity to visit the local hospital here, which is less than a kilometer from where we are standing here today. And I wanted to understand their preparedness for a potential disaster situation. I was amazed, in fact, I was enthralled to see that the hospital had an entire underground section with an alternative disaster-resilient entrance that could be opened in the event that the surface facilities were destroyed by an avalanche or a landslide. This part of the hospital, resilient to the severest of earthquakes, is set up in the basement floors and is fully equipped with all medical facilities, alternate power supply, and even supply of potable water for up to 5 days. This is a perfect example of disaster preparedness, and that's what I look forward to. Yet, when we think of a situation where many villages with populations similar to Davos do not have some of the basic infrastructure, namely primary health centers, schools, roads, creating spare capacity seems to be a luxury. And I do not blame our political leaders for that. Many developing countries are on a catch-up mode, and achieving DRR infrastructure compared to the first world will require not just knowledge, but technology and policy making, but also a lot of resources that have many other urgent, imminent, and competing needs. Therein lies the huge significance of MDG 1, eradicating extreme poverty. And in this endeavor, those countries that are better placed have to assist those that are not so well placed, not just through fundraising and fund sharing, but also sharing technology, which I think is more important, and hand-holding. For instance, the crucial role played by the remote sensing community is often underrated. It is an extremely potent tool to empower the policymakers and the practitioners to take decisions based on facts, be it on the protection of coastal areas, vulnerable areas, backwaters, and even public lands. The fourth issue is one of prioritization. Climate change, adaptation, and DRR are global priorities which get significant attention from international agencies and donors. There is an international strategy on disaster reduction. There are specialized agencies on climate change. Almost all international agencies are working on it. And therefore, there is need that we focus on the not-so-developed areas. Fifthly, management of lands, public lands, and water plays a crucial role in DRR. Yet land management in developing countries always gets the back seat because it is often highly politicized, and also it becomes an emotive issue. Professionalized land management is a must to ensure that disasters can be prevented. I want to raise another issue here, which is often not discussed. There are smaller disasters happening in developing countries every day. I will give you an example. In 2012, in India, there were 22,000 900 deaths from natural disasters, primarily floods, cyclones, earthquakes, and droughts. Of course, this is a big number, and we certainly need to make efforts to bring this down. But in the same year, 10 times that number of people lost their lives in India alone due to anthropogenic disasters, namely traffic accidents, fire, and construction-related fatalities. In India, 147,000 people lost their lives due to road accidents alone. Do we not need an international strategy for reducing road accidents? When one looks at the issue from a global perspective, road traffic accidents are local, isolated, and is within the ability of the local system to deal with. Most developed countries have achieved the accident rates that are less than 30% of the global average. So the issue of dealing with road accidents is not seen as a global issue, as is a tsunami or climate change. Yet, when looked at from the point of view of a family that suffers the loss of a member, whether it's a road accident or drowning, the consequences are no different. The point I'm making is that international agencies should also look at how countries and communities be helped to deal with routine accidents whose number is exponentially rising. There should be discussions on how probably the automobile companies can be made to invest in road safety in countries where they sell their vehicles as a part of their duty or as a part of their corporate social responsibility. I want to conclude my speech flagging the issue of mainstreaming and integration. If climate change and disaster risk management policies have to work at the front end, they need to be mainstreamed into development planning. We cannot have a national or local development plan and then have add-on ideas on DRR, climate change, gender, biodiversity, and so on. I must say, when it comes to practicing these ideas, operators at the lower end are a lot more integrated than those at the top. Let me give you a very quick example. In India, a district collector in India is in charge of planning and implementing projects at the district level. There are about 550 districts in the whole country. Most projects and programs are implemented through the district level. There is an urgent need to rationalize the district level work, and rather than loading new projects onto the district collector, we should supplement it with specialized staff, knowledge, technology. Issues such as climate change and DRR are often integrated organically at that level, almost by default. Unfortunately, as institutions grow, both in government as well as in the international organizations, we get into specializations. I have myself had programs on the same or linked subjects funded through the budget, and also some supported by international agencies on disasters, climate change, gender linking, resilience building, or institution strengthening. Each agency demanding the district collector's special attention, quote unquote. Synergizing at the higher levels, I believe, is essential only to achieve better and more sustainable results. Well, ladies and gentlemen, my attempt here was to raise some of the issues that I have faced and handled during my career in the civil service over the last 35 years with specific examples. While doing so, if I could get some of you thinking on these issues, I would consider myself to be successful. I once again thank the organizers of the Global Risk Forum for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Haran, for your excellent speech and also highlighting and putting into context what is happening on the DRR natural disasters side, but putting it in relation to other, what we call daily disasters, family disasters, putting in context with the road accident, the numbers of fatalities, which are 10 times, as I understand, 10 times higher than due to natural hazards, which also should make us thinking on how to really integrate all these different risks into one perspective. Thank you very much. Dr. Haran is ready for looking at the time frame for 2 short questions. Is there any question? Yes, please, Dr. Ren.
Well, thank you very much for a very thoughtful and I think very interesting talk. When you talked about the implementation from policy to practice, what do you think was the most important element in your own work that made this a success? You said you have been making success in your area, and that, of course, that has been reflected by the numbers that you have shown and that you said. What was it the most important thing for you to make these things successful? Because that's something we're really discussing here all day, in a sense that there are good scientific research with a lot of data. We have good policies, but however, we see that the implementation of these policies are lacking behind the knowledge that we have. So what do you think is most important in terms of what drives success?
Can I take it?
Yes, please.
It's not one thing that I can put my finger on. Again, I'll give an example. The Tsunami Rehabilitation Project, it was a major project, and as you know, Kerala was affected as a kind of default. The waters went and hit Africa and then came and hit the western coast, the southwestern coast of India, and we lost about 220 lives and more than almost about 100,000 houses of fishermen, the poorest of the society, were affected. When we were implementing that project, I give this example because it stays in my mind and I like to go back there often. We have these little islands and spits from the mainland that are located just away from the southern coast. And it's inhabited by traditional fishermen, coir workers, coir weavers, and so on. They have been living there for centuries. But some of these little islands or spits are probably less than even a kilometer wide. And therefore, when the tsunami came, it just washed away everything. One of the things we decided was that we'll construct bridges across so that they have escape routes. And we did that. Constructing those bridges was a challenge because, nobody wanted to put it, initially nobody wanted to give land for it, and then everyone wanted it closest to their houses. So therefore, I thought it was a success the moment the person came and said that, no, I want it to be moved and closer to my house. We constructed these 4 bridges, major bridges, which are escape routes. And after that, we did an impact assessment after about a year. And we found that not only when we had the mock drill, not only was the escape time reduced by 1,000 times, what has also happened is that the economic situation of the families living there has improved. How so? One, the fisherwomen who used to earlier have to sell there because they could not come to the mainland have now started driving in these little vans they have been given under the program and selling in the mainland and getting sometimes up to 10 times the earning. The children who were earlier going into the fishing trade are now coming to the mainland to go to colleges, and they're going into, studying IT and so on. So what I found is that it was a combination of decision-taking, ensuring doing the right thing, and a lot of social engineering, ensuring that the people were convinced that this is being done for their benefit. Because the first question that I was asked when I had gone there was that we have lived here for centuries, and the tsunami came only now. So why are you bothering us now with all these ideas? But then they understood. And I think this is where lies the success. And I don't think it was one thing. It was all together.
Question? Yes, please. The last one.
I'm Professor Tiong Tan from Singapore. Thank you for your presentation. My question refers to the integration between the government's effort and the NGOs, and what sort of training is in place in Kerala and in India that there could be a comprehensive disaster preparedness and intervention in your country.
Do due to shortage of time, I did not mention that. We have recently started a program in collaboration with UNEP, whereby the State Training Institute has included input on disaster risk reduction as a compulsory input in every training program for public servants. Now, apart from public servants, what we have also gone on to do is training the non-state agencies, because that's a very important, they play a very important role when a disaster happens. And it has just started off, but in answer to your question, I would say that there is no standing institutionalized system to really have a coordination between the state and non-state actors, because they are not member of the SDMA, the State Disaster Management Authority, but I guess the Act allows that we engage them as and when we require. But unfortunately, the Act is interpreted in a manner to mean that we engage with them only when it comes to relief and rehabilitation, but not in the stage of preparation. And that perhaps is left to the states to deal with. And I think slowly we are realizing that that's a very potent group we need to make use of. And probably it will come over time.
Unfortunately, due to lack of time, we have to close the discussion. I would like to express our gratitude to Dr. Haran by handing over the certificate for another apartment to be retrofitted in Bangladesh, and it is my pleasure to thank you once again very warmly for your excellent presentation. Thank you so much, Dr. Haran. Thank you.